I always feel really self-conscious about my toy shelf. Because I always get this feeling of whenever the video goes into any sort of serious topic, is that going to be diminished by the fact that I'm back here sitting in front of fucking Legos, you know what I mean? Death is one of the concepts which has plagued the mind most consistently since the birth of self-awareness, which has caused us to constantly search for a reason that we find ourselves to be alive. If life exists for the sole purpose of survival, moving on from one day to the next, then it ends up feeling sort of empty and lacking in philosophy. So, in many early human civilizations, spirituality began to evolve, which of course eventually led to the belief that there would be something that came after the final time we closed our eyes. The earliest known belief in life after death can be traced back to the ancient Egyptians, who believed that some form of self would be transferred to the kingdom of death if properly preserved. But of course today, the more famous belief in the afterlife is one of good and bad, reward and punishment, heaven and hell. This overarching trope in human history is the core inspiration for the NBC sitcom The Good Place, which takes the otherwise simplistic concept of the afterlife either being candy or coal and expands it to make one of the most fascinating shows on all of television. The Good Place is a show that is good. It takes the quality you expected and it expands on that, making a show which is very watchable and very enjoyable and very great. It's a good show. I can say without a doubt that The Good Place is probably one of the greatest shows ever made for TV, and it's also something that's really hard to discuss with people who haven't seen it already. Not because it's hard to describe, because it's not, but because the best way to experience it is to go in with no information whatsoever. If I were to start talking about The Good Place with someone who has never seen it before, my first paragraph would convince them to watch it, and the first sentence of my second paragraph would ruin the show for them. In past videos, like the Milo Murphy analysis, I've warned people that this was going to happen, and then they ignore my warning, and then they watch the whole video and they comment like, hey, you convinced me to watch it, but you spoiled the whole thing. And yeah, that's what happens in videos like this. So I'm going to be talking about this show in an order which I think I usually don't like doing, which is chronological. I'm basically going to go through every season of the show and talk about all the things that I took away from it, and I'll occasionally give you like spoiler warnings. So I might say, if you've only seen season 1, spoiler warning here. Or if you've only seen the first couple episodes, spoiler warning here. And I'm doing this so people who are watching the video and haven't got up to a certain point in the show, they can theoretically turn the video off without spoiling the experience, but still take in some of what I have to say. So welcome to my #GoodPlacesOver party. I'm sure I'm using that hashtag correctly, and I will not be looking further into it. So, most religious texts you'll find feature a set of rules which can be vague and contradictory. It can be hard to universally say in every case if an action is wholly good or bad, based on rambling thoughts printed almost 2,000 years ago. The Good Place, in contradiction to this, depicts a system of judgment which seems to be objective and mathematical. For every action that we do on Earth, a mathematical value is assigned which either adds or subtracts to your total score. In theory, an example of this would be, if you throw something in a recycling bin, that's plus 5 points, and if you litter, that's minus 20 points, things like that. Man, if only all those people had installed NordVPN, which happens to be the sponsor of this very video. With NordVPN, they could have remotely stopped all the people in the afterlife from tracking their deeds by cloaking their location and thus making themselves impossible to track. What? I'm making a video where I'm encouraging people to not watch to the end of the video. I gotta start sprinkling in the sponsor at this point. The actions of every person on Earth are kept track of by the accountants of the afterlife. And out of all the humans that die every day, only those with the highest of the highest scores actually are allowed into the good place. Everyone else, by default, goes straight to the bad place. This brings us to the start of Season 1, Episode 1, where Eleanor Shellstrop wakes up and is informed that she has made it into the good place. She's given a tour by Michael, the immortal architect of the town, and she's even given the chance to review the memories from her life and all of the many charitable things she accomplished. Then, Eleanor is introduced to Chidi Anaganye, her specially selected soulmate. At this point in the episode, much to Chidi's dismay, Eleanor reveals to him her terrifying secret. She is in the good place by mistake. All of the things she is being rewarded for, she never remembers doing. Her being there is nothing more than a case of mistaken identity. Chidi, who was a moral philosophy professor before death, struggles with how to handle this situation. Knowing that Eleanor would be placed into literal hell if her secret were to be revealed, he comes to the conclusion that his only moral option is to coach her on the topic of philosophy, not only to help her pass the act of not getting caught, but also to make her into a person worthy of being in the good place. Thus, we have our sitcom's premise. It's status quo that can never be broken or changed. It's after this that we also meet our other two main characters. Tahani, a rich woman who used her time in life to raise massive amounts of money for charity, and her soulmate, a silent monk named Jianyu. Okay, spoiler warning number 1. If you watched like a couple episodes of The Good Place and you were like, this isn't my thing, it doesn't seem very deep, turn the video off and go watch more. So my first impression that I had of The Good Place as it was presented in episode 1 is that it seemed a little bit hypocritical and classist. One of the first things that we see in the story is that Eleanor's supposed life on Earth consisted of helping those in need, such as poor and starving children in foreign countries. Because of this, she racked up just enough positive points to be one of the few humans not being tortured for all of eternity. This is kind of weirdly cruel, right? Because the implication is that Eleanor is better than all of the people she helped because she racked up more points by helping them. As supposed humanitarians, the first thought in all of these characters' minds should be that it's horrifying that dying, starving children in impoverished countries are immediately sentenced to live in hell and be tortured forever because they have neither the time nor the opportunity to rack up any good place points. But what makes The Good Place such a great show is that instead of unanswered questions constantly nagging at your mind until you slowly forget about them, you are actively rewarded for having thoughts like that. The Good Place starts off as a show that wants you to believe that it's a lighthearted sitcom about a trashy Arizona girl trying to figure out how to be a good person so she can stay in heaven. But it's so much more than that. It's a deconstruction of the potentially flawed ways that a supposed afterlife would go about judging us, and generally a discussion of what it actually means to be a good or bad person. For every philosophical quandary which Chidi and Eleanor come across, Chidi serves as a total mentor to Eleanor with answers about every problem that they face. But rarely does he have one answer, or one that is cut and dry. He often has numerous different ancient thinkers he quotes from individually, with each one having their own different take on the current situation. Philosophy is often complicated by a concept known as consequentialism, which is basically the theory that acting with good intentions isn't enough to be a good person, and instead that the direct consequences of action should be what is judged. While this sounds like a very basic premise, it can be taken to cartoonish extremes that make it somewhat impractical. And of course, Chidi often follows this trend by predicting numerous different routes which all seem to end with some domino getting knocked over in the wrong way. But unbeknownst to the characters, they all secretly have been very clear representations of this specific issue. Okay, so at this point we're going to talk about spoilers for the Season 1 finale. This is the only time I'm going to do a spoiler warning just for the finale. From here on out, if I say like, spoiler warning from Season 2 forward, that's the whole season. So this is your last warning for a finale. Let's talk about the end of Season 1. At the end of the first season, after weeks of torment, as the characters' lives are plunged into confusion and turmoil, Eleanor has an epiphany, which proves to be one of the most shocking twists in television history.
Just now, as we were all fighting, I thought to myself, man, this is torture. And then it hit me. They're never gonna call a train to take us to the bad place because we're already here. This is the bad place.
Yes, the good place that we have been seeing inside of The Good Place isn't actually The Good Place. It's a new experimental subchapter of The Bad Place, dedicated entirely to finding new ways to torment the very few select humans who are actually real inside of the community. Eleanor, Chidi, Tahani, and Jianyu. This is a terrific setup and reveal, and in hindsight, it seems really obvious, but up to this point, the show has done a tremendous job of camouflaging its true colors. I'm tempted to compare it to Cheers, another show which, at its best, features a cast of characters who seem to exist exclusively to torment one another. Specifically, Sam, Diane, and Frasier are all created to occupy the same space, but they are never allowed to find any finite joy or happiness. They're incomplete when they're apart, but they're bitterly unhappy when they're together. And why is this? Why are they constantly written to be this way? Well, because the studio audience thinks it's funny. And it is. It's hilarious. And that's just how sitcoms work.
My life is ruined and it's all your fault. Don't you think someone should pay for that?
So what The Good Place does is it hides its true intentions behind the storytelling aesthetic of your standard sitcom, down to having Ted Danson on the front cover. And that's why so many people say that they watched 1 or 2 episodes and then they decided it wasn't their thing and turned it off, because the show is trying to trick those people into thinking that it's the kind of show that it doesn't actually want to be. It's trying to disguise itself as a basic bitch. So the reality we discover is that the hell of The Good Place is the relationships that form between these characters and the stress that they have been causing each other. This idea is clearly inspired by huis clos. I'm not French, why'd I say it like that? This idea is clearly inspired by huis clos. This idea is clearly inspired by huis clos, or No Exit, an existentialist play written by Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre? Fuck, I gotta look this up.
Jean-Paul Sartre.
An existentialist play written by Jean-Paul Sartre, where 3 humans find themselves waiting to be placed into hell in a small room, before realizing that their punishment is being in that room with one another, which lends itself to a famous quote which roughly translates to, "Hell is the other." The other being the means through which we perceive ourselves, like a figurative mirror. The ultimate torment of the play is that all of the characters left in the scene are only able to perceive themselves through the lens of the other people in the room. It's kind of like how I always feel like shit whenever I accidentally Google my name. PhilosophyTube has a great video essay about this. If you haven't seen that, I'll link it in the description.
So this is hell. I'd never have believed it. Do you remember all the stories they told us about the fire and brimstone and the torture chambers and the burning mall? Old wives' tales. There's no need for red-hot pokers.
The Good Place takes this idea of a group of humans being used to torture each other in lieu of more barbaric tactics, and expands it into a multi-series arc exploring the logistics of hell and how it would be implemented. From here on out, we have some juicy Season 2 spoilers on our plate. As a reminder, this warning covers all of Season 2, including the finale, so here we go. In terms of addressing why each character has entered the bad place, we discover that, like Eleanor, each and every one of these characters has a hidden layer which reveals a secret truth that we didn't immediately perceive with them. Starting off with Eleanor, which is pretty obvious. She was someone who chose to do nothing but wrong throughout her entire life, casting aside friendships for her own personal gain and refusing to help anyone but herself. She ends up working at a company defrauding the elderly by selling them fake medication over the phone, which she chooses because it's the least social and most profitable choice she has. However, much of this stems from the horrible treatment she received from her parents, who were so inept that it inspired in her a lack of trust or compassion for those around her. Jianyu, it turns out, is actually named Jason, and he is from Florida. While it might be tempting to leave it at that, it's important that his strange upbringing tended to be one of the main things that made him evolve into such a trashy person. His constant lack of any real money caused him to be pushed into a life of crime, something that was also true of most of his friends and family. While the origins of those two characters doesn't detract from the horrible things that they did, it does help to contextualize their entire life story. Where things get more interesting is the other two humans, Chidi and Tahani, who by all accounts seem to be the most worthy to actually end up in the good place. Chidi wanted to be good in life, but this was true to the extent that he could never make choices, causing all of his friends to suffer through life as he failed to actually accomplish anything. This is what led him into studying moral philosophy, something which further stunts his ability to make basic choices, leading to the show's most repeated phrase,
"This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors."
Yeah, I know.
He has perfect motivation, but the consequences of his actions were that he negatively affected the lives of everyone around him, which is why he was the perfect choice for an unwitting tool of torture to others in the bad place. Additionally to all of this, he kept drinking almond milk despite knowing it was bad for the environment. Tahani, meanwhile, did good in her lifetime, helping out a significant amount of charitable causes with her attempts to raise money, but all while doing it for the sake of gaining the admiration of others, be it her sister, her parents, her rich peers, or the general public. She is essentially a representation of your general billionaire, who sends off small portions of their money piles to help others because it's good for their brand and they want to be famous. It's again worth pointing out that a character like Tahani could theoretically use her wealth and power to rack up thousands of good place points in a week, while a dying, impoverished child could never have the opportunity to accomplish even a fraction of that in their entire life, and would thus go to hell by default. Eleanor figuring out the truth behind the community causes Michael to reboot the experiment, creating a new timeline where the group starts from scratch. However, once again, the group pieces together that they can't be in a positive afterlife if they keep having to suffer so much, leading to him rebooting hundreds of times over and over again, much to the annoyance of the other demons pretending to be people in the neighborhood.
This is the bad place!
Beef.
Eventually, after wasting hundreds of reboots, Michael realizes that he is moments away from a demon mutiny, and decides to secretly join forces with the humans in the experiment, which the humans agree to under the single condition that he also joins them in studying human philosophy and morality. Thus, Michael unwillingly volunteers himself as the fifth person the show examines, which is fitting as he is arguably the worst person among them. Michael is a demon whose sole function and purpose is to torment the lives of others, and who has, at this point, spent hundreds of years trying and failing to do this to the rest of the cast. Thus, when he attempts to sit in on Chidi's classes on morality and philosophy, he fails to grasp any of the core concepts. When the trolley problem is explained to him, his first intuition is to find a solution where everyone dies, and he then takes the exercise far too literally when he pretends to understand it. Eleanor comes to the conclusion that he's acting out because he doesn't understand and is frustrated by this, and the pair come to the consensus that the reason Michael can't understand the lessons is that he lacks empathy. Michael is immortal. He has never worried about death and never has really felt any actual pain. Without these things, he is incapable of fearing the same fates that could happen to you or I. The cast decide to remind him that if this experiment fails, he will face certain execution, especially if his deception is uncovered. This leads him to have an emotional breakdown, as for the first time, he contemplates his certain non-existence. leading him to have an emergency midlife crisis. But it's through his bond with the other characters that he is able to move past this, as he comes to understand that humanity has solidarity for others who suffer pain. And he eventually starts to feel real emotions.
You humans have so many emotions. You only need two: anger and confusion.
This all happens alongside the revelation that Janet, who is essentially the community's version of Siri, has been growing slightly more advanced every time she is rebooted for a new experiment. When she begins to view herself as a mutation and asks Michael to kill her, he can't bring himself to because he views Janet as his closest friend. The development in these stories of Michael becoming someone who cares about those around him to the point beyond what a regular human would is so satisfying and subtle that in the season 2 finale it's briefly unclear to the audience if Michael really has turned good or if he's simply going to betray the cast members. But he pulls through and decides to betray the bad place in order to help the band of humans survive. The cast eventually find their way into a meeting with the judge, where they pitch their belief that it's a mistake that they were all sentenced to live forever in the bad place. To put it simply, they all feel as if they didn't have a good enough chance on Earth, and they hold the wish that they could go back and choose a different path. This inspires Michael and the judge to indeed do just that. From here, we're going to be dealing with spoilers from Season 3, and I'm giving you a couple seconds to close the video. Okay. Season 3's main question that it brings to the forefront is this: what motivates us to be good? And what rewards are there for us being good people? In the story, Michael goes back in time, sort of, and stops each character from dying, and in doing so attempts to point them towards a path of being a better person. And with the exception of Jason, each person manages to accomplish this at first. Eleanor becomes obsessed with doing as much good as she can no matter the cost. Tahani leaves all of her possessions behind and dedicates her life to real activism. And Chidi, well, seems like he's at least a little bit more assertive. But in each case, the world fails to reward them for doing this. And they, in fact, are actively punished for doing good. Being good is hard, and it's so easy to give up, and it seems Eleanor is very ready to do just this. Worried by this, Michael and Janet decide to intervene a little bit. And then a little bit more. And then a lot. And then they're basically living on Earth without permission from the judge and intervening in the lives of the group every hour on the hour. Michael becomes convinced that the secret to bettering all of these characters is for them all to stay as a group, just as they were in his experiment. And he conspires to keep them in the same city working on the same philosophy project for as long as he can. You end up being reminded of a producer on a long-running TV show, desperate to find any reason to keep these characters together, even if it stops making sense or actively ruins all of their lives. But eventually, the group overhears Michael and Janet, and they are forced to reveal the truth to the once again rebooted humans, as they explain everything about their former lives in the bad place. Having this knowledge means that they can never get into the good place, and that they are sentenced to being in the bad place by default. At first, this causes many of them to understandably snap.
You put the peeps in the chili pot and add the M&Ms. You put the peeps in the chili pot and makes it taste bad.
But interestingly, Tahani and Jason's first reaction is to consider what led them to be worthy of the bad place, and to then start handing huge handfuls of Tahani's money to random people on the street. Activism without witness, without reward, and only with the sole interest of helping others. Eventually, the group gets together and agrees. Even if they can't get into the good place, they can help others arrive on the path that will get them in. They become morality vigilantes. These episodes are meant to dive into some of the central themes of the show. Jason's encounters with his father reveal how many people are driven to lives of crime and desperation because it's their only option. Tahani's encounter with her sister highlights how mishandled nurture can affect how one seeks validation throughout their entire life. But most importantly, Eleanor's relationship with her own mother, who has taken a new identity and is living a sun-bleached life as a minivan soccer mom, reveals to us that there is no such thing as someone who is bad by nature, and how all people have a shot at changing for the better. Ah, God, when you think about it, Eleanor's mom, she stayed hidden all that time. Everyone thought she was dead. She was just hiding under a new identity. She must have been using NordVPN, which is the sponsor of today's video. I mean, she would log into NordVPN and check her Gmail, and no one would know where she was. So yeah, go to nordvpn.com/Quinton. You guys know how to spell my name, right? It's Q-U-O... God, give me a second. Okay, according to my senior yearbook, it's Quinton. So nordvpn.com/Quinton. There's a lot to unpack this season, but I actually want to skip through a lot of the drama and action in order to go right to the finale. In the final few episodes of Season 3, the characters sneak their way into the accounting firm of the afterlife, under the belief that the bad place has been tampering with the results to make sure that no one goes to the good place. It's there that they discover that not only does no one they've met have a chance of getting into the good place, no one has gotten into the good place in 521 years. Michael is dismayed and confused by this, convinced that some demons must be forging the data before realizing that they wouldn't have to. He discovers that as humanity has evolved, society has become dependent on economic hierarchies, leading to horrible, selfish people at the top. Which means that even something as simple as buying a rose for Mother's Day causes any human to lose points by the nature of consequentialism. There is really nothing on Earth that one can do which isn't affected by this. Even working your average shift in a common American middle-class job means manufacturing a profit that doesn't go to you, but to the highest podium possible. In short, and I'm only going to say this once, people, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. This revelation inspires the judge to allow the cast to attempt a brand new experiment. To see if the reason that the characters in the fake good place could gain points is that the sterile environment of the fake town allowed them to actually do good and to grow without the complications of a modern society. And from here, we deal with spoilers from Season 4. Season 4 is great, but I'll admit I don't really feel like breaking it down episode by episode. There's a lot of drama, a lot of twists, it's a great watch, but I think most of the things that I want to talk about actually happen in the last few episodes. At the end of the experiment, the group manages to prove that while not every person got better, every person was capable of change if put through the right standards. The judge concludes that the experiment has proven that humans are too complex for the current system, and thus they should be wiped out and the universe rebooted.
Obviously, Earth is cancelled.
Earth is what now?
Hooray for eco-fascism in the afterlife! In the next 2 episodes, the cast has a limited period of time to try and make a pitch for a functioning way to judge humanity as the judge is slightly distracted. And they eventually come up with something. Every person entering the afterlife will essentially be put into some version of the place that we have seen in these first few seasons. They'll be put through tasks which indeed will torture them, but also are meant to allow them to reflect, to change, to understand their mistakes. And if they choose to repent and change, there's the slightest chance they'll eventually pass on into the good place. Doing this means admitting fault without being asked to, which means that a lot of the worst will never escape this system as their memories are wiped over and over again as the system keeps rebooting. But it still allows for all of these people to prove themselves. All of those starving children who were sentenced to the bad place by default now have a chance to prove that they could have been good people, and thus will most likely pass on into the good place. It's a good system, not a shocking one, not a revolutionary one, but it works. And with that, the cast finally moves on, for the first time in the entire show, to the titular good place. And things are not as great as everyone would have presumed. I want to tell you guys a little story, and I'll admit it might not be 110% relevant, but it's really important context to get you into the same headspace that I was in when I watched this season. At the start of 2020, I decided that I needed a vacation. The first thing I did right after this decision was take a long voyage to the state of Indiana, and hopefully next month I'll get to tell you guys the story of what happened there. And the second thing I decided to do was to go to Disneyland for almost 2 weeks in a row. Now, Quinton, you might ask, what would possess you to go to Disneyland for 2 weeks? Well, in early 2019, I almost moved to California. In fact, I even took a couple trips there to do some apartment shopping. And while I was there, I bought an annual pass because it seemed really cost-effective. But then my life went to shit and I had a mental breakdown. Yay! The point is that in the year after that, I kept making as many excuses as I could to be in the Anaheim area so I could use the annual pass, which I had spent a lot of money on. And don't get me wrong, I love Disneyland and I always enjoyed going, but having an annual pass when you don't live in California doesn't make sense. Incidentally, my pass lasted from February 2019 to February 2020, which turned out to be the perfect space of time, because if I had even gone for a month after that, that would have been a rip-off. So I went to Anaheim, and my game plan was I was going to show up, and I was going to just start messaging every YouTuber or every human being, every nice person I had ever met that was supposed to live in the Southern California area. And I was going to be like, let's hang out. I'm here for 2 weeks. And then any other day that something like that didn't happen, I was going to go to Disneyland. But the thing is that only 2 people ever got back to me. Maggie Mae Fish and Commenticate. And they're the loveliest people, and the whole trip was worth it just to see them. And I had so much fun the 2 nights that I spent hanging out with them individually. But pretty much that whole trip, any moment other than those 2 nights, I was at Disneyland all day and often into the night. And it was this weird mixed feeling because I really liked being able to just casually go to the park, to just have days where I would walk around and look at the beauty of it all and just take it in. But at the same time, every day that I went, I felt a little more dead inside. Oh, there's my happiness. It's up there. At some point, my brain stopped functioning in a coherent way. I can't explain this, but at some point, I went to mail a package home, and the address I put down on the envelope, it was not a real address. It was a combination of like 3 different addresses, and it was the most obnoxious thing to try and fix a couple weeks later when my brain was working again. Because I called them up and I said, hey, I gotta change this package. And they said, well, we gotta make an attempted delivery first. And I said, that's gonna be hard because the address isn't fucking real, buckaroo. So in the end, I went to Disneyland every single day for 12 days in a row. 12 days. And at the end, I felt so empty, so insignificant, so forgotten by everyone, and more continuously depressed than I felt pretty much since the last time I tried to do this and I went to California and no one wanted to hang out with me. It was that kind of self-loathing and sadness that I usually only get when I Google my name on accident, but it was just all the time without any root or cause. And when I got back home, I had to take a couple weeks off to recover. I had to take a vacation from my vacation in order to become a functioning person again. And that's what it took for me to be able to start working on videos again. Anyways, the moral of this story is Quinton would not have fun in the afterlife. Once the cast actually arrive in the good place, they're horrified to slowly piece together that the good place is broken. Everyone who arrives starts out fine, but as they experience any and all pleasantries at the snap of a finger with no challenges and no changes, they become what the characters in the show call pleasure zombies.
What's your favorite part about living here?
I mean, it's perfect. We're all having orgasms literally all the time. I died a virgin, so that's real crazy.
Okay.
Most of them have been there for centuries, if not eons, and are clearly barely coherent. And the cast realize that there's only a short amount of time before they will be facing the exact same fate.
I'm back. Go-karting with monkeys got boring really fast.
It did?
Oh, no.
And so, Eleanor and Michael come up with a solution which is, I'm sure, controversial to many viewers. In the good place, there now exists a door. When a citizen of the good place feels complete, they can pass through it, and at that moment, they will not exist as we know existence to be. No one knows what happens at that point, other than the fact that passing through the door is the end. Full stop. As we've discussed, our worth in our lives has become defined almost exclusively by our fear in death. From the moment we became coherent as a species, death gave us meaning. To exist or not to exist? That is the question. The fear in the end is the thing that inspires empathy in Michael all the way back in season 2. And now The Good Place is presenting the end not as something to fear, but as something of acceptance. And one by one, it's something that most of the cast ends up bringing themselves to, and it's presented more as beautiful than as sad. I'm not saying that this really in any way applies to your life as it is right now. No one watching this video should seek out death, but it's so poetic in terms of what it means for an afterlife. Humans don't last forever. We have to make our mark when we have the chance, and I don't think any of us would be comfortable with eternity. But that doesn't diminish a single day that we have on the earth, quite the opposite. I mean, even more beautiful than the door is Michael's choice to become a real boy and live his life on Earth. When you watch these brief clips of him living these moments out, you really start to understand how more impactful they all are than the stagnant afterlife we spend our whole lives imagining. And you really start to understand we can't always rely on there being a heaven above us or hell below, because moments like these are why this is all important. And as Eleanor passes through the door in the final scene, we see a sparkle that was once her sort of float down to earth, and it seems to influence someone to do good. As re-entering the cycle of the universe, the holistic organism of existence, Eleanor has once again done good with no personal gain. And while she starts off the show as a bad person who doesn't deserve to be in the good place, she ends it as a manifestation of the concept of doing good. I think The Good Place, if overly simplified, seeks to ask one question. What do we owe our fellow man? What do I owe you? What do you owe me? Right now, the answer to that question is, please stay indoors for the love of God. But in non-pandemic times, what are the answers to those questions? I think every person watching has their own answer. But mine, I think we owe it to ourselves to make this our good place. This video does not do The Good Place justice. I mean, I talked about many of the different things that made me love it. Not all the things, but it's not the full experience. As a random example, I think I've mentioned Janet twice in this video, and she is one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character, so it feels really weird that she came up so little in my analysis. If you've got this far and you've never watched The Good Place, first of all, congratulations for ruining this piece of television for yourself. Second of all, I really recommend this. It's on Netflix, I think, and Hulu, which is rare for a lot of shows like this. Usually it's one or the other. And yeah, I would just really recommend checking this one out. A big special thanks to the sponsor of this retrospective, NordVPN. If you haven't heard of Nord, additional congratulations on this being the first YouTube video you've ever watched. But if that's the case, I'm excited to tell you guys about them. So what Nord does is opens you up to thousands of servers all over the world, which you can then connect you, and it will essentially make it seem like you are connected to the internet from those various locations. Now, why would you want to do something like this? Well, security, for one. Doing this helps you protect all of your private information you don't want getting out into the world. Your IP address, your passwords, your no-bake cookie recipes your great-grandmother gave you. And since most of us are operating from home right now and are very hungry, those are all things that are really important to protect. But it's also useful just because it's mischievously fun. Nord opens you up to the global internet, and what that means is when you're using it, you're not limited to whatever content is available in your little pocket of the world. Like, someone linked me a video last week that I really wanted to watch, but I couldn't. So I just went to Nord, hopped around countries until I found one where the video was public, and then I watched it, and it was great, and I threw it into a video. Hell, earlier today I logged into Netflix in the UK. Have you seen all the shows they have that we don't? Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Blackadder, Fargo, Steven Universe, that show with the pickle, Atlanta, The Thick of It, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Red Dwarf. You could be watching Red Dwarf right now with one click, and you're not doing it. Why? When you use my link nordvpn.com/Quinton, that's Quinton, you'll get 70% off of 3 years of Nord and your first month entirely free. That's a really great deal, and I encourage you guys to jump at it while you have the chance.
Oh, shit.
The coffee poured out on my face. I'm not losing my mind in the quarantine. What are you talking about? I am in a quarantine right now. I actually am. I'm not seeing any of my family or friends. I'm keeping myself shut in. I'm even, when I order pizza, I even tell them to leave it outside the door, you know, that sort of thing. And what's funny is I've actually been living this way like for at least a year. Been living alone, you know, making videos from home. Don't have a lot of friends in the city, so just working constantly. And I used to be in the dumps about it. Like, I was like, this is no way to live a life. But the moment all this stuff happened, it was like, I'm the model citizen. You know, it changed that quickly. And like, I'm glad I'm taking care of myself, being healthy right now in this environment. Weirdly enough, I think I'm going slightly more crazy than I was when I was living this way, not by choice. But I've been doing okay. We're gonna make it through this though. This is my Quinton quarantine. You guys are my Quinton quarantine crew, and we're gonna do this. I don't know. Like the video, hit that subscribe button. I lose like 700 subscribers every time I upload, so hitting that subscribe button if you're not subscribed really helps out. Follow me on Twitter. That's enough callouts for one video. I'm gonna go take a nap.